members of the show. Slate, date November 9th, 1995. Interview with Jack Wellner, interviewed by Lori Feiner Goldberg in Denver, Colorado, and it'll be conducted in English.
Lori?
Oh, wait.
Okay,
Oh.
you tell me. My name is Lori, L-O-R-I, Feiner, F-E-I-N-E-R, Goldberg, G-O-L-D-B-E-R-G. Today's date is November 9th, 1995. I have the honor today of interviewing Mr. Jack Wellner in Denver, Colorado, in the United States of America.
Okay, Lori.
Please give us your name and the spelling of your name.
My name is Jack Wellner, Jack, J-A-C-K, Wellner, W-E-L-N-E-R.
Please give us your name at birth and the spelling.
It was Jacob, J-A-K-O-B, Nuta, N-U-T-A, Wellnyarz, which was W-E-L-N-I-A-R-Z.
And can you please give us your nickname and the spelling?
They used to call me Mitcher. My friends used to call me Mitcher. My sisters, my mother, they called me Mitcher.
Can you spell that?
M-Y-C-I-O.
And give us your birth date.
I was born on September the 10th, 1920.
And your age today?
So that makes me like 75 years old. Or
The-
young.
The city that you were born in?
I was born in Lodz, L-O-D-Z. That's in Poland.
Mr. Wellner, please describe what your life was like before the occupation.
Well, we were a family of 5 children. My mother and 5 children. My father died when I was 10 years old, back in 1930. And I was 10 years old, and we had a newspaper stand, which my father operated. As a matter of fact, he was the president of the Newspaper Distributors Union. And in 1930, he got sick, and he went to Vienna for an operation, and he never came back. As a matter of fact, he is buried in Vienna. My brother, who was at the time 14 years old, he took over the business. He was just out of grade school. He took over the business, and I, a 10-year-old boy, I helped him. Used to get up in the morning, like 5:30, 6 o'clock, sometimes earlier, and go and help him with bringing the papers to the stand and then distributing it to our customers. I had an older, my brother was 4 years older than I.
And his name was?
His name was Shmudek, which is Samuel. And I also had an older brother who was 6 years older than I. Her name was Henya. And I had 2 younger brothers who live now in Israel. My older sister got married around, I would say, about 1935. And a year later, she had a little boy. His name was Sevek. And we lived a comfortable life. As a matter of fact, we lived a better life than most of the Jews in Poland, because my mother used to get some help from the United States. My mother had 3 brothers in Colorado. I had 3 uncles in Colorado. So one of my uncles, my Uncle Abe, used to send us money like almost every month. And that was a great help to us. And as I said, we lived a comfortable life. It wasn't easy, of course, with my brother being so young and having to run the business, but somehow we managed. Then, of course, the war broke out.
Let's go back a little bit. Tell me what kind of school you went to.
I went to public school. I have a seventh grade education. That's the extent of my education, formal education, because college or high school wasn't free in Poland. So I didn't go to high school or college, of course.
Can you describe the school to me?
The school was, it wasn't coeducational. There was a school for boys. My sisters went to different schools. And the schools, it was a Jewish school. Only Jewish kids went to the school. The teachers, some of the teachers were non-Jews, were Christians. But the school president or principal was also Christian. And the school was different than here. And we had our own class where the teachers used to come every hour. A different teacher would come in, and we had our teacher. The main teacher was like our patron teacher. There was this one teacher, and all the other teachers used to come. As to here in the States, as I understand, all the students go to the teacher's class. This, as a matter of fact, the main teacher, my main teacher, I saw him later on when, I'll tell you about it, when we went to ghetto. I saw him. He used to come to our apartment and talk to Mother. And I'll never forget, he used to say, Mrs. Woniarz, he spoke in Polish, of course, Mrs. Woniarz, the only way we will get out alive of this situation will be if the Germans will just suddenly collapse. That's the only way. He didn't make it.
Did you belong to any organizations when you were a youth?
Yeah, as a youngster, I belonged to a Zionist organization. It was called Hanoar Hatzioni, meaning the Zionist youth. And we used to get together there and sing Hebrew songs and play games. As a matter of fact, I won a prize as the best Morse. I used to learn the Morse alphabet, so I won the first prize. As a matter of fact, I still remember every letter of the Morse alphabet, dot to dash, I still remember it to date. What you learn as a young fella, you never forget. So we used to go on some hikes. On the weekends, we used to have a good time as kids, whenever, of course, when it was mostly weekends, when I wasn't busy helping out at home.
What kind of hobbies and activities did you have at that time?
As a youngster, I didn't have too many hobbies. It's not like in this country where you come into a house, it's like a store of toys, every house. We used to play around in the streets, like play soccer. We didn't even have a soccer ball. We used to take an old sock, and fill it with rags, sew it together, and then we'd kick it around. And that was our recreation. We used to play all kind of games like hide and go seek, all kind like kids play. We had a normal childhood. We didn't know that there's an old Jewish saying: when a worm gets into a radish, he thinks that's heaven. He doesn't know anything else. Same thing with us. We didn't know anything better, so that was a life.
Was your family a religious family?
Well, my mother was. We kids, we were not religious. Of course, at every house was kosher. We had to go on the holidays. We used to go to the synagogue. Mother was religious. I had to put on my tefillin. What do you call them in English?
Phylacteries.
Phylacteries, right. I had to put them on every morning. Mother insisted. So I made a deal with her. I told her that I'll eat breakfast first. And you know, say the prayers, put them on later, you know, say the prayers later. So I used to say, Mother, why should I pray first and think about food? Isn't it better that I'll eat and think about praying? So she used to say to me, oh, you stupid jokes. But I didn't care too much about it. And the reason I didn't care too much about it was because when my father died, I was 10 years old. Before school, I had to go every day to the synagogue to say Kaddish. That's the prayer for the dead. For a whole year, every morning before school, and then after that I had to go and help my brother too. So that sort of turned me off of it. So I would put on the phylacteries and take the prayer book and put a newspaper underneath it. I would read the paper and I would sort of hum as if I was praying, reading the newspaper. That's how I got by with. So I finished it very fast. So Mother would make a remark. She would say, "Oh, you measured your head already if it didn't shrink?" Because the phylacteries you put on your head. But my mother was religious, and we had a kosher house. And of course, when Yom Kippur came and everybody was supposed to fast, so we kids didn't want to fast. So we used to go to a non-Jewish neighborhood, and we would go in and buy some ham, which were those days if Mother knew she would kill me. So later on, the Polacks would ask, "Hey, tell me, when is that Jewish holiday when the Jews are allowed to eat ham?" That's what we used to do as kids, you know. Now I could have been at that time 14, 15 years old when we used to do this.
How did you celebrate the Sabbath in your family?
The Sabbath in the family, Mother would bake her own challahs. And we used to take the challahs down to the local bakery. After they finished baking the bread, we used to give the challahs. And everybody knew when I took down the challahs, or my brother, my sister took the challahs to the bakery, everybody knew that those challahs belonged to Mrs. Velnyash. Because somehow I remember she braided them, not like normal, they braid like 3 braids, you know. She used to braid them like from 8 braids. And they came out beautiful. Everybody knew that those were our challahs. And then besides that, it was customary in Poland that for the Sabbath, Mother would prepare a pot on Friday, a pot with potatoes and beans and meat, and covered up with paper and tied with a string, and take it down to the bakery. And the next day at noon, we would pick it up after the services in synagogue. We would pick it up and go and eat it. And we used to call it a chulent. We used to every week we had a chulent, and that's how they made it. They prepared it on Friday, put it in overnight. At noon Saturday, when you came in to the bakery, it was smelling. You know, everybody put different things in it, but it still, even though it was tightly wrapped, but you could smell it was beautiful. That's how, because you're not allowed to make fire on the Sabbath. So this is what we ate, a warm meal Saturday at noon. It was, as I said, it was a happy life. You know, we kids, what do kids know? Kids are happy every place. So we had a happy life, and then, of course, the war broke out.
What were your goals as a young person thinking towards your future?
As a matter of fact, in 1930, in 1929, a year before my father died, my uncle from Denver came. As a matter of fact, at that time, he lived in Greeley, Colorado. He lived all his life in Greeley. He came for the first visit. He came to this country in 1909. So the first time he came back in 1929, 20 years later, he came back to Poland, came home to see his parents and the family, sisters. He had 4 sisters in that small town of Biela Podlaska. That's where my mother was from. His parents were there, and 4 sisters lived there. And my mother and another uncle, Uncle Jacob, lived in Lodz that I was born in. So when he came in 1929, I'll never forget, I was 9 years old. He brought me a coat, it was like a cashmere coat. It had 2 pockets here and 2 pockets here. And I was so proud. And at that time he told my mother that him, Yankel, my Yiddish name was Yankel I want to take to America, like this. And in 1937, I was almost 70 years old at that time, I got an affidavit from my uncle to come to America. And I registered it in the consulate, and since the Polish court was at that time was a quarter system, the Polish quarter was always overfilled, and they told me that I would have to wait about 3 years until my turn will come. And sure enough, believe it or not, in 1940, when I was already in the ghetto, I received a letter in Polish from the American embassy in Berlin. It looks like they took all the papers from Warsaw and they took it over to Berlin. I got a letter in Polish saying that if I'll come to Vienna or to Berlin, I'll get my visa. But they know about the travel restrictions, so they know it's not possible for me to come. So that's why at the very end, the last paragraph said, therefore, we advise you to postpone your immigration plans until the situation will clear up. And of course, even if I had a chance, if I could have gone to Berlin or to Vienna to get a visa to go to America, I wouldn't have gone. I wouldn't have left my mother and my family there under the German occupation. As a matter of fact, when the war broke out, I ran away with my brother. We wanted to run away to Russia. A lot of Jews survived in Russia. Since that small town where my mother was from was near the border which the Russians took. The Russians occupied Poland up to the river Bug. The Germans took on the west side of Poland up to that river. The Russians came from the east to that river, and the river Bug was the border between Russia and Poland in 1939 when the war broke out. So the small town where my mother was from was not far from that river. So my brother and I, we tried to run away. We wanted to go to Russia. So we went first to Warsaw. My older sister went with us too, because she as a woman, she wasn't afraid, because me as a young boy who looked in Poland looked Jewish, because the Poles are mostly blonde. As a matter of fact, before we got to Warsaw on that trip, the Germans threw me off the train of one station before we got to Warsaw. So my sister went there to find out if it's okay to cross the border. She came back and she said that they are shooting, they can't cross now. So she went back to Lodz, and my brother and I, we stayed in Warsaw until April when we read in the paper that the Germans are making the ghetto in Lodz. So we came back to Lodz. So as I said, I wouldn't have gone to America even if I could have, because I didn't want to leave mother without any man in the house.
Did you experience very much anti-Semitism prior to this time in your community or in the place that you lived?
Yeah, the anti-Semitism in Poland was always rampant. Always. I remember as a youngster, teenager, I wouldn't dare. We lived in a neighborhood, a Jewish neighborhood. I wouldn't dare venture out of our neighborhood into a non-Jewish neighborhood because I would have gotten beaten up. I remember in Poland they have a holiday. May the 3rd is the day of the Polish Constitution, and I'll never forget it. They had parades. So they had an official anti-Semitic party in Poland, and they would go with banners and they would scream, "Down with the Jews," and everybody would scream, "Down, death to the Jews, death," like this. They would run out, and most of the religious Jews had beards. They would go and just cut their beards and beat them up. So there was a great anti-Semitism, and that's why it's no wonder why the Germans made all their extermination camps, or 99% of their extermination camps they made on the Polish soil, because they had help from the local population. If a Jew was hiding out, they would point him out to them. I remember when the war broke out in 1939, I'll never forget when the German, about 3 or 4 days later, like I think on the 5th of September, the war broke out on the 1st of September. On the 5th of September, the German army came in. They came in with a might just unbelievable. So right away, it was tough to get some bread or anything else. So I remember one night we stood in line all night long, the whole family, in front of a bakery to get bread. 8 o'clock in the morning, when the bakery opened up, German police came to keep order. And as soon as the Germans came, the Polacks would go out and point out to the Germans, "Jude, Jude, Jude," and the German would go with his rifle, "Raus, raus." After standing all night long, we wouldn't get any bread. Those were our good neighbors, our Polacks. They, as I said, anti-Semitism was just unbelievable in Poland. They had in the Polish Sejm, they had like congressmen or congresswomen that they proposed legislation against ritual slaughter. You know, the Jews kashrut, what we call in Hebrew, and it was tough. They had restrictions in the universities against Jewish students. Jewish students had to sit on one side, not together with the Polish students. It was anti-Semitism was just unbelievable. And during the war even there was a streetcar going through the ghetto. I'll come to the ghetto a little bit later, but during the war there was a streetcar going through the ghetto to go out of town, because the ghetto was part of the city of Lodz. So if they wanted to go outside, there was a streetcar. So they put barbed wire on both sides of the curbs, so the streetcar could go through, and then they built a bridge over the wires. The streetcar had electrical wires, so if I wanted to go across the street, I had to go down like a mile or so, to go to the bridge and go over and then go back. And when the streetcar was going by, the Polacks would look at us, sticking out the tongues at us and pointing like in a zoo, you point out like this, laughing and pointing at us, and we could hardly walk, you know. There were, in the ghetto, as you know, there were like 100, 150 died of starvation. We were just barely walking.
Tell
And
me about when the ghetto was first built.
Well, as I said, the ghetto, when they created the ghetto, they put barbed wire around the most dilapidated section of the city. And whoever was non-Jewish had to leave that part of town, and all the Jews had to leave outside the ghetto, because most of the Jews lived outside the ghetto.
What date was this?
That was in April of 1940, April 1940. When my brother and I, when we were in Warsaw, we read about it, making the ghetto, so we went back. And on a certain date, they told us we got to leave. So there was still, I remember there was still snow on the ground. So we built a sled, took couple boards, built a sled, and then we piled up on the sled whatever we could. Piled it up high, bedding, pots and pans, and whatever we could take it, because you couldn't go back. You had to take it all at once. And the whole family was walking around it to keep it from tipping over, holding, and that's how we pulled it and went to the ghetto.
Okay, we are on reel number 2 of Jack Wilner's interview, November 9th, 1995. Lori?
Please describe what it was like when you moved into the ghetto.
When we got into the ghetto, we were more or less lucky. Meaning what? My mother had a cousin who lived in that part of town. On the 5th floor, no elevator, on the 5th floor. And she had 2 rooms. She was there with her husband, and she was gracious enough to give us one of their rooms. And don't forget, we were 8 people. My mother, my 3 sisters, my brother-in-law, and my nephew. We were 8 people in this apartment. People used to go in there, and wherever there was an apartment empty, the ones that the Polish people, the Christians left, they would go in. But we took that apartment up on the 5th floor. Actually, counting our measure, it would be the 6th floor. And there was no running water, because during the winter of 39-40, all the pipes froze. There was no water and no toilet. We had to go down 5 floors, down to the outhouse in the yard. It was a closed-in building. It was like a box. There were 105 apartments in that whole complex. So once we got into the ghetto, we settled in there. We settled in a room that was about maybe 6 feet wide. Wasn't any more than 6 feet wide, maybe 7. And about 12 feet long, 12, 13 feet long. And all of us, the 8 people, lived in that one room. The building, that apartment was the last apartment of the building. So the building that wall, the end of the wall didn't have any windows. There was a window only to the yard, but at the end there was no windows. During the winter, during the following winter, we didn't have any heat in the room, so that whole wall was covered with snow. We all slept together to keep warm. We'd sleep, cover up. We had some bedding, some down bedding, so we would keep warm all together. But from our breath, the outside of that bedding would get wet, and that would freeze. And the walls, as I said, from the moisture, the walls were actually snow. We had a kettle, a tea kettle there with water. Tea kettle would freeze. Everybody had to work in the ghetto. Who didn't work didn't live. Everybody had to work. My brother and I, we started working in a lumber mill. My brother-in-law, he was sent away before we even got to the ghetto. He was taken away by the Germans to work someplace. We didn't know where. So my sister was getting 9 German marks for her and her little boy for his work in outside. So she didn't have to work. But my 2 sisters had to work. One of my sisters worked in a place where they were braiding straw. And those straw braids, later made boots for the German sentries. During the winter, they would stand in, like big boots that would stand indoors so to keep warm. So she would come home every day, her hands bleeding from the straw, was so sharp, and she would always cry. She had, her hands were, she had to work. Then my other sister, the one next to me, because my 2 younger sisters that I'm talking about, the youngest one worked in the store place, and the other one got lucky. She got into a place where they distributed vegetables. So over there she could eat. So what did she eat? They ate like all raw, like raw potatoes they ate, cabbage, everything raw. They couldn't cook it, but this way at least they could eat a little bit more. And we would get a ration. Everybody would get a bread for 8 days. We would cut it, make 8 portions out of a round bread. 8 portions. And this we had to have for 8 days. My brother, may he rest in peace, he was very meticulous. He had his portions every day. He wouldn't touch any more than his portion that day. And I, for instance, I just couldn't stand it. I was hungry. So I would borrow a day from tomorrow, a slice from the day after tomorrow. The last few days, I didn't have any bread left at all. So I used to go out in the field and pick some leaves and take it home, and Mother would cook it like spinach and stuff myself with that stuff. So coming back to when we moved into the ghetto, everybody had to go to work, and Mother had to work too. So there was a place, the same as they braided straw for those boots for the Germans, they also had a place where they braided little pieces of rags. They tied rags together and braided them. So Mother signed up for that place, and we would take home some stuff at home, and my 2 sisters, my 3 sisters actually, would do it at home, braid them at home, and supply it in the name of my mother. So that way she was working, because as I said, who didn't work didn't live. When everybody went to work with a pot, small pot, everybody took to work. Why? Because we used to get at 12 o'clock, we used to get our lunch. And the lunch, what did lunch consist of? Some water and a few pieces of potatoes. At that time, they used to say that we have to have at least 4 pieces of potatoes. Pieces means not whole potatoes, just small pieces, 4 pieces. So everybody would come, put in the pot in that window, and would get it. And so we had a spoon too. We would look if you had the 4 pieces of potatoes. If we didn't have enough, we would put it back. I said, we have only 3. So the woman who was dealing it out, she would add another piece. Some other guys who were more enterprising, they would put a piece of screen on top of the pot. And when she was pouring it in, the water will run through and the potatoes will stay on top. They saw right away. So if there was more than 4 pieces, they wouldn't complain. But if it was less, right away they would show there's another piece missing. So, and in my place where I was working on a bandsaw. It's a woodworking machine. And we were making, there were 9 bandsaws, and we were making shower slippers for the German army. The wooden slipper, later they put some piece straps someplace else, but we, in our place, we made just those wooden soles for it. And we had to make 300 pairs a day. If not, we wouldn't get that little bit of soup. So it wasn't easy. It was hard work to do it because you had to put in a narrow saw where you would cut out the contour of the foot, and then later, and then after we had to cut out the contour of the foot, and it was piled up like 300 pairs, we would call the woman who was, the control department, the inspector. She would count 300 pair, and she would give us the okay that we can go ahead and finish them. So then we would change the blade to a wide blade and cut out the heel and, finish up. So in the beginning, it was very difficult. But then later on, when there were already thousands of pairs piled up in the place where had to finish them up, we started cheating. How did we cheat? Let's say I made, for instance, 50 pair or 100 pair. Then I would borrow from the other bandsaws and pile it up at my place, 300 pair. She would come and give the okay. Then we would give it back to the other guys, and the other guys would do the same thing. This way we would cheat it. So we had to work, hard to get that little bit of soup. When we came back home, let's say like 5 o'clock in the evening, we came back home from work, I would holler up for Mother. So she would go out on the staircase. Every staircase had a balcony. She would go out there and let down a bucket, an empty bucket for water. She would let down on a string from the 5th floor, let it down. I would take the bucket, I would tie up my pot, and she would fill up the pot. And I would stand in the line, because at that time the janitor, he would open up the well. Every building had its own well for water. There was no central system. Every building, every house had its own well. So when we came home from work, we would line up, and he would open up the well, started pumping water, and we would fill up a bucket, or my brother too, fill out a couple of buckets of water, and then to carry it up there, all the way up on top, on the 5th floor. This was the daily routine. And of course, in the corridor there was a bucket for dirty water that we used. And this thing went on. In the beginning, when I came to the ghetto, I was 19 years old. I had a harmonica. We couldn't take along. We had to give up our radios before we went to the ghetto. The Germans issued a proclamation that all Jews have returned the radio by this and this date. Anyone found with a radio after that date will be shot. And there's some people who didn't give back, and they were caught and they were shot. So we couldn't, we didn't have a radio, and of course we didn't, at home we, let's say, had a record player, but to the ghetto we took only essential things.
For example, what did you take?
We took all the beddings, as I said, all the beddings and pots and pans and clothes and these kind of stuff we took, but no record players or anything like this. So I remember I had a harmonica. In the beginning I used to get together with some friends, and I would play and we would dance, you know. But then little by little, the Germans made animals out of us. We lost interest in anything else except food. The only thing we were thinking about was food. We used to remember, how it was, how this tasted. I remember one time we got in a ration. We received every 2 weeks a ration, and it was a starvation ration. You know, a little bit of flour, a couple potatoes. You know, a little bit of some kind of oil. I don't know, a little bit. In the 4 years in the ghetto, 4.5 years in the ghetto, I didn't eat an egg or a piece of fruit. Nothing of this kind. Just a piece of bread. And I remember one time we got a piece of horse meat, and we were happy to get it. I remember one time when we stood, I remember we were joking. One would say to the other one, "Get out, get away from me, I'll kick you," or something like this, you know. So one time we got in one of those rations, we got some beets, leaves of, not beets, but the leaves of beets. And I remember Mother would put some salt on it and roll it up and fry it, and we said, "Oh, tastes like herring," you know. We would try to remember. One time we got a piece of some kind of a sausage. I don't remember what it was made of, but who cared in those days? Who cared what it was? So we got a little piece of sausage. We used to call it slide sausage. Why slide sausage? We took a piece of bread and put one slice of sausage on top of it. And before you took a bite, you just smelled it and pushed it away with a finger. We slid it away and bit just the bread. So just, you know, we would slide it away, just have the smell of the sausage, just but eat bread. And we left that little piece of sausage left with the last piece of bread. We would slide it away because we didn't want to lose the taste of that sausage. We used to call it slide sausage. So as I said, we lost contact. I lost contact with friends. Yes, had to go to work every day, and as I said, the only thing we were thinking about or talking about was food. That was the only thing. I remember one time I was working at this lumber mill, and the first lumber mill that I was working at was before I worked on the bandsaws. I worked on a table saw. A table saw is, I don't know if everybody knows what a table saw is. It's a table-like, and the saw protrudes from the table, and it turns. It was a big saw, and I had to cut logs of lumber, of timber, with a bark on it. I had to cut it through. And the log that I had to cut, I was a little guy. I wasn't big. I'm not big now either, but I was short and skinny in those days. The log was bigger than I was, and I had to push that thing through the saw. And I remember in Denver, a friend came who worked at the same place, and he was telling everybody here. He remembered when he came in, he saw the log go by itself. He didn't see me because I was so small behind that log pushing it. But this was the first factory. But later, my brother worked in this factory too. But later, that factory broke. It burned down, and we went to this new place that and I was one of the first ones. So I get one time a call from the director of that plant that because I'm a good worker, I have a choice, either to become foreman or to go to work in a bakery for a whole month, the book. So I said to him, look, I don't want to be a foreman because I can't push 100 people to work. I know how I feel towards my foreman who's pushing me faster and faster. I don't want to be foreman. I'll go to the bakery. And then besides that, I thought, if I go to the bakery, I'll have bread. Right? Wrong. I got in the bakery 0.5 kilogram of bread. At home, I used to get 1/4 of a kilogram a day. So, of course, that 1/4 kilogram of bread at home, I didn't take already because I divided it among my, my mother, my sister, my brother. They divided that piece because I got that 0.5 kilogram at work. But I couldn't take another bite in that bakery, another bite of bread. There was a policeman watching me all the time. I'll never forget the time where I was cutting up bread that had holes eaten out by mice. The bread was stacked there, and there were mice. So when they send out the bread from the bakery to the distribution centers, to the stores, that we got the bread on little coupons. Everybody had a coupon to get its bread. So when they found the bread that had a hole eaten out, so they couldn't send that thing out, so I would stand there with a knife and cut in slices and throw it into a barrel full of water. Later, they would mix in that bread, that soft bread from the water, they would mix it in with the fresh bread. And I was standing there, as I was standing there, cutting in and throwing it in, and I was hungry. I was hungry. So and the policeman is standing right and watching me. So I say to him, what would happen if I took a bite? So he says to me, a Jewish policeman, he says to me, see, this is poison. This is poison. If you take one bite, you are dead. And what did he mean by that? Whenever they found somebody who did some kind of he stole something or whatever, they would send them, there was a jail. It's called on Czarnieckiego Street in the ghetto, a jail. All these people, those felons who stole a piece of bread or something, felons, they would send them there, and whenever the Germans needed 1/4 of people to supply to the extermination camps, they would empty those things. They emptied those, the jails, they emptied all the hospitals. In 1942, in early 1942, there came an order that all the women who are receiving those 9 marks for their husbands' works in Germany, they're supposed to come to that place of Czarnieckiego. They're going to be resettled to Germany. At that time, we didn't know about, we were cut off from the world. We didn't know that there was an Auschwitz or a Dachau. We knew about Dachau from before the war, but didn't know about Auschwitz and all those other, Treblinka, Majdanek, Chelmno. We didn't know about all these extermination camps. We were locked up, just locked away from the world. We were surrounded by barbed wire, and then nobody could get in or nobody could get out. So we didn't know what was doing. We didn't know about the war. All those women who received the 9 marks are supposed to go be resettled to Germany. They'll get nice places with their husbands and stuff. My sister felt she didn't want to go. So when the policeman came to pick her up, she wasn't there. She hid someplace at somebody else's apartment with a little boy. So this policeman said, I'll be back in 2 hours. If she's not going to be there, mother was in bed, sick in bed. I'm going to take your mother. And of course then, because she had to go. I'll never forget when I said goodbye to them, my little nephew, he must have been at that time maybe 6 years old. About 6 years old must have been. He says to me, Mitchell, see that the grandma eats. Because mother would take her bread. He didn't want to eat those watery soups. So the mother would take from her bread and give it to him. We had a scale at home where we had to give everybody the portion. So we weighed it. So 25 decagram means, a quarter of a kilogram. So one time the little boy says to his mother, to my sister, he says, Mom, 25 grams is so much. Give me only 20. So what did my sister do? She would put it. We had little weights, 5, 10, and 20. She would put a little of the weight underneath it. On top it was only 20, and underneath she would put 5. And she would weigh it. She says to him, and so he sees, says, Mother, it's 25. 20 is only so much. Give me only 15. So when they took them away, he says to me, watch out, Mitchell, watch out that grandma eats. They took them away. That was 1942. Never saw them again. Then later, that same year, 1942, they had a big selection in the ghetto. They called it the Sperre, like a curfew. Everybody had to stay home. They would come out. They came down to the yard, and they would shoot out in the air, shoot out a rifle or gun, whatever, and would scream out, "Alle Juden runter," all the Jews down. We saw them coming from the window. We lived up high. We saw them coming. All the Germans, soldiers were surrounding the whole block with the rifles. And we knew that Mother would never pass a selection. So we took Mother up. Above us there was an attic. And the attic was that we used for drying clothes. The walls of the outside attic, they were not solid walls. There were strips of wood. So the ventilation, there were small windows in the building itself, and then when we came in, the doors were slots, so there was ventilation to dry. And then there was a big chimney. The main chimney from the building was going to all the way to the roof. So there was a big chimney. So we took Mother, we put a chair behind the chimney, and we set Mother down there and asked Mother, please, Mother had asthma, and we asked her, please try not to cough. And we locked her into that. So looking from when they came up, to look in there, they didn't see anything because she was behind the chimney. We hid the key so everybody would know, whoever will come back will know where the key is to take her back, took her out of there. And we all went down. Walking down, my brother was very pale. So my sister would pinch real hard, pinch his cheek, to give him a little bit of color. So we came down there, and down there all the people were standing in a line, and the Germans were standing with the pass. And one had a riding strap, like a crop, like the horsemen have. He would, first my two sisters went. No, I went first. Would put like this, the thing on there, and he says, "Where do you work?" "For Arbeitsdu." So I screamed out, "Tischler Resort." Whole, the woodworking place. He let me go. Then my brother, the same thing. "Where do you work?" And he screamed out too. They let him go too. And then my two sisters, they're younger, young, they let him go by. And right away we ran upstairs. And I want you to know that they sent up the Jewish policemen had to go up there and make sure that all the Jews were down. So we went upstairs, of course. At that time, they took all the children and all the older people. They took them right away. There were big trucks that put them there. At that time, later I found out they evacuated all the hospitals. And there was one hospital, a mental hospital. They threw the people down from the windows down on the trucks below. That was in 1942. And life went on like this. Every day there were about 100, 150 people died of starvation. And there was just no hope. There was no hope. We started believing in the supernatural.
Okay, we are on reel number 3 of Jack Wellner's interview. The date is November 9th, 1995.
You were telling us about the supernatural.
We started believing, as I said, in supernatural things. I don't remember where we got the idea, but we had a table, a round table, and the table had to be without nails, only glued together. I don't know where that idea came from, but we got a table, and we would sit down like 3 or 4 people, my sisters, my neighbor, and we would put our wrist, we would sit like halfway around the table, only halfway around the table. We would put our wrist on the edge of the table, and we would say like this: "Table, table, rise up." And the table would rise on 2 legs, and it would go down. And we were holding it, with our wrists like this. And then we would say, "Table, table, how many people are sitting at this table?" And the table would go up. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And then I would ask a question: how many buttons are at Jack's sweater? And we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And we'd ask first questions like this: how old is, let's say, fella? We'd say 1, 2, go down like that, 16 or 17, whatever. And then we came to the crucial question: table, table, how many days will the war last? And we go up 1 and 2, go up like 400 or 500 times. Remember the first time. And we would sit down religiously every day at this table, and every day it would count down 1 day. 350, 349, come down already to 25 and 24, and we come already to 3 days, and 2 days, and 1 day, and we became ecstatic. We didn't. Tomorrow the war will be finished. We just, celebration. We were going out of our minds. Tomorrow the war will be. And the next day, again, how many days will the war last? 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. We wanted to believe, but there was no hope. There was no hope. And my sister, fella, the one who's 2 years younger than I am, she was sent out in 1944. She was sent out to a labor camp. We didn't know where. 1944 in March, she was sent out. We didn't know where. They sent her away. Then 3 months later, June the 6th, which was, as I found out about it after the war, which was D-Day, the American invasion of Europe, June the 6th, my brother died of starvation. My mother couldn't go to the cemetery. We didn't have a regular funeral. A wagon would go from house to house every day, and there were always dead people. They would put a tag on his leg, and we had to go, after work, we had to go like in the evening, like 6 o'clock in the evening, to the cemetery, and there was a rabbi in the cemetery, and that's where they were buried, you know, in a communal grave. It's important to say, for me, one thing. When we got out to the cemetery, my mother couldn't go. It was just my sister and I, my youngest sister and I. Mother couldn't go, so we come out to the cemetery. And there was a woman with her husband and a daughter at the cemetery. And she asks us, how did you know that Dorothy, the Dora died? I said, I didn't know Dora died. We came because Shmulek died. Dora, this girl, was my sister Fella's best friend. And I got to tell you this story. In the ghetto was maybe a year before. Must have been 1943 sometime. My sister and her best friend, Dora, were walking in the street, and all of a sudden, Germans surrounded the whole area, and they picked up a whole bunch of women and assembled them in a place. They were bringing women in one place there, near the wires, near the barbed wire. I told you was the street where the streetcar was going by, and near that bridge. And at the corner where it wasn't the corner, a sharp corner. The building was like this. There was a couple stores in there before the war. So they had a big gathering place there, and a lot of women and German soldiers standing there watching. At one point, one of the Germans looks at my sister and makes like this and turns around. My sister saw it, and so did her friend. So her friend says to a fella, he tells you to run. So my sister said, I'm afraid he may shoot me. So she didn't move. And then he turns around again, an older German. And again, my sister makes like this, and turns around. And my sister started running. And she came home. She came home and told mother about the story. She ran over after a little bit, a few hours later, she went over to the mother of this girl. So she says, where's Dora? So she told her the story. What happened? What happened the next day, she came home. They brought her back. And from that day on, she never spoke a word, never talked to anybody. She got sick. She told my sister what happened. They took, as my sister, as I recall, they took those young girls, they had to strip naked and dance for the German officers and then do all kind of work for, cleaning job and everything. And from that day on, she got them in bed. She never got out of bed. After my sister was sent away to that labor camp, her friend's sister came over that this Dora, the sick girl, wants to see my mother. Mother could hardly walk. I went over with my sister. We went over to her. We come in. She was in bed. Her face was, I think she had contracted tuberculosis. Her face was pink, which was a beautiful girl. At that time, she could have been maybe 20 years old. When mother came in, she told her own mother and sister to leave. She wanted to be with my mother alone. She had a little ring on her finger. And she took that ring off and gave it to mother, says, give this to fella, because I know that she'll survive. I know she'll survive. So my mother says to her, but dear child, you'll get well, you take this and you'll give it to fella. That was the last time my mother saw her. And then when we went out to the cemetery, as a matter of fact, my brother had a crush on her, on that girl, the one who died. So like later, they said they couldn't be together, alive, so they're together. So when we came out, she died. They died the same day they died. So that's why she asked, how did you know that Dora died? We didn't know. We came out to Shmulek's, funeral. So he died, as I said, on D-Day. And then in August of 44, the Germans started coming to our workplaces that they're going to resettle us to Germany. We can go. The guy would come out, this German, the main guy from the Germans in Lodz, his name was Beboff, Hans Beboff. He would come to our factory and would say, meine liebe Juden, my dear Jews, you going with your own families, you can take along whatever you want. Don't think that when the Russians come here, this was a time when the Russian front was coming closer. Don't think that the Russians will treat you well, because don't forget, you worked for the German army so many years. You come with us, you'll treat you right, and this and that. We didn't know. We didn't know about Auschwitz. So when it came time for our block to surrender, and at that time, my mother was left, my younger sister, I, and there was a young woman, my older sister friend, who lived on the other part of the ghetto, but they took away her husband and two beautiful children. They took away. She was left alone. And when they liquidated that part of the ghetto, she came and stayed with us, this woman. So we, the four of us, we were left in that apartment, up on the 6th floor. But at that time, we had already both rooms, because in 1942, when the selection came, they took away my mother's cousin with her husband. They took them away of the selection, because they were older people, and they took them away. So we had already those two rooms, which we didn't need. We were left already, the three of us. So it came our turn, our block. I saw through the window from top that the Germans were surrounding our area. So I knew that we were supposed to come down. They came out, and again, they shot in the air. Everybody should come down. We had a china cabinet in that one room. I moved away that china cabinet from the wall far enough to put in a chair for my mother to sit down. And my sister and that friend, that woman, and I, when we heard them come up, I would take the table. See, one side was against the wall. There was only one opening there at the end. So I would take the table that I told you before that we used for our spiritual experiments. I took that table and pulled it to the end of that cabinet, and took some bedding, stuffed the bedding underneath it, and on top. So we would cover the end of that thing. And we were inside, standing in there. My sister, my younger sister, she kept on fainting. Every few minutes she fainted from fright. and hunger. We didn't have any food already. And we heard the Germans, they came into the room. We were like 2 feet away from them, not more. The only thing that divided us was the cabinet. And we heard them look under the bed or whatever, that we heard them, they're talking, and then they walked out. And after they walked out, I waited for another 5 minutes or 10 minutes, waited until it was quiet. I threw down that bedding and I got out and looked out and they were gone. So I took Mother out and my sister kept on fainting every few minutes. So we didn't have any food. So Mother said, we can't stay like this. We'll go. Wherever they'll take us, they'll take us. So we took with us, we put on our best clothes, and then Mother with this, she would even take, shrouds, sheets for shrouds. She was so religious that she had to have that. And she's packs, filled up with stuff that we could hardly walk. We started walking down towards the place. We had to go to a place where the train was, to the train station. We started walking. Mother could hardly walk. So by the time it was getting dark, we were about halfway to the station. So we went into a hallway for a house, and we sat down there, and we sat there all night until it got light. Then we got up and started walking. When we came to the station, there were boxcars, and there were planks leading up to it. And when we came to the station, the Germans would help Mother go up, bitteschön, very nicely, Oh, we thought, well, it looks like we got a piece of bread and a piece of margarine. Of course, right away, I finished the bread, my sister divided. I finished it up right away. And they locked the cars, and I don't know what time it was, the afternoon, like 2 or 3, whatever, in the afternoon, the train starts out. We come to a stop, must have been in the middle of the night, like 2, 3 o'clock. We come to a stop. We couldn't see, there was a little window in that boxcar with bars. So we lifted somebody up to look out there. And he says, well, there's some kind of a camp, the electrified wires of Auschwitz. And the train kept on going back and forth, and finally we come to a stop, and the doors open, and screams, screams like it was not real, pulling people down, pull them down. I jumped out, the first one, and I helped Mother down, and my sister and this woman, and all the stuff that we brought, everything had to pile down. Everything on a pile, all this stuff came, whatever we had on ourselves. And right away, we were together, right away, men this side and women this side. And so I ran over I said to Mother, look, I don't know where they're taking us, but I'll try later. I'll try to find out where you're at, and I'll come look you up later. At that point, she had that piece of bread that they gave us in Lodz before we went on the train. That piece of bread, she didn't touch it. She just shoved it in my hand and said to me, you take it, you'll need it. That was the last I saw of her. Later, I found out from my sister, they separated her and this young woman from Mother. My sister, she wanted to go with Mother. This is my mutti, this is my mother, to the German. He grabbed her by the hair and just pulled her back. And the friend took her away. He says, come. That's the last time she saw Mother. In Auschwitz, I was for about a week. And that was, I don't know, could have been a year, I don't know how long, probably a week, because it was just hell. You could, we would get a little bit of soup in a pot for 5 people, no spoon. So we tried to be, in the beginning, tried to be civilized. Everybody would take a sip. But you know, two sips, everybody started going with their hands inside, trying to get out some potato, whatever there was, you know. And then, this, it was just hell. To the bathroom, to the outhouse, you couldn't go when you wanted to. You had to go whenever they told you to go. Then you had to go. And the minute you sat down, they pulled you out right away. It was just hell. It's just not indescribable. I was lucky. I was only there maybe a week. That's all. I was lucky. Then they took us and put us in another train, another boxcar. Put us maybe 70 people, one boxcar. They gave us a piece of bread. Gave us already those striped clothes, pants, clothes, and a hat made out of pieces of rags. You know, that this was the hat. They gave us a piece of bread, a piece of that German, with that they call it Blutwurst, blood sausage, and a piece of salt and margarine. And they put in some big jars, big containers full of water, and some empty ones, empty containers. And they closed the doors, and the train started out. Of course, most of the people, they started with the bread and the salty margarine, and right away they wanted to drink. I dug out a hole in the bread and shoved in the margarine in there, so I didn't eat it all at once at the same time. But most of the people, they got diarrhea. And I can't describe you 4 days and 4 nights what was going on in that train, in that boxcar. It's just indescribable. I can't describe it. What was going on. We finally made it to this camp, which was a quarantine camp, camp number 4, which was around Dachau. Dachau had at that time, I think, there were 11 camps. This was camp number 4, called Kaufering. It was a quarantine camp. Over there they made selection too. Whoever wasn't good enough, they sent them into Dachau, to the camp where they had the dormitory. And the able workers they sent. So they sent me and 150, well, a total of 150 Jews from our transport from Lodz. They sent us to this camp, which was camp number 10, called Utting am Ammersee. And when we got to the camp, this camp was already occupied by 500 Lithuanian Jews. And those Lithuanian Jews came from a camp that was sorting out clothes from the victims. They were sorting out clothes, a special camp. And they had enough food, so they were all well fed, strong. We came skeletons. What they could do, like 2 guys would pick up a section of rails, we had to have 10 people to pick it up. So they didn't believe us. They said that we are simulating that we can't. You know, we are pretending we can. We want to conserve our energies. They didn't believe us. You know, this old saying says that a man who is well-fed doesn't believe that somebody's hungry. They didn't believe us. And believe it or not, the Germans started beating us because they said that we don't want to work. So the first, when I got to that camp, they come out. We had to, in the morning, we had to stand in what they call a pell, the yard there, and people, one by one, they would come out and count. At one point, a German asks, "Are there any carpenters?" Since I worked with wood, I volunteered, I'm a carpenter. So he takes me and another guy and puts me to work at a place where they had already some people before, some Jews, I guess, before, had dug out trenches. There were zigzag trenches about 6 feet deep, about 3 feet wide, and they put us to put in steps. We had to cut out steps in the dirt. So put in, let's say, cut a step and then put a piece of wood so the dirt wouldn't cave in. And then next one, and again, so put those steps. So we were working there. The next day, he takes me and says to me, you will go work with those two carpenters, two German carpenters. You'll help them. I say, okay. I went with them. We go to the woods. There was a slope in the woods, and the pine trees there. We go to the woods there, and this one German says to me, you wait right here, we're going to get some tools. We'll be right back. You wait here for us. I say, okay. I'm standing there waiting. All of a sudden I hear somebody screaming, hey, somebody screaming. I take a look. There's a German walking with 3 Jews. And he calls me to come. So I didn't go because I was waiting for my bosses here, the carpenters. So I didn't go. So I hear him scream. Every time comes a little louder, finally comes over to me and hits me right in the face. Right, I started bleeding right away. Said, come with us. So I tell him, boss, I'm waiting here. Come. He just drags me to go work. And of course, the 2 carpenters, as I imagined, they came back. They didn't see me, so they reported me to the big boss that I ran away or whatever. But I went to work. I worked all the time picking up some concrete slabs, picking up from one place, carrying it to another place. Then the afternoon started sort of raining, so that we were working near a house, a private house. And it started raining, so some of the guys, we got under the eave of the building to shield ourselves from the rain. And while I'm standing like this, the big boss comes and sees me, says, daher bist du versteckt. Here you're hiding. And he hits me. I said, but boss, and he hits me again. And I'm bleeding, so I thought, come here. So I had to go with him. And as we were walking away, I see my boss, for whom I worked. I said, he was coming in. So I thought, tell him that I worked here. I go over, and he hits me too. And he takes me back to the woods there where the 2 carpenters were working, the ones that I was originally supposed to help. And they were driving in wooden stakes into the ground because, as I said, the woods were sloping. They were going to build some shacks in that place, so they had to put in wooden stakes, and then they leveled them off to build a foundation to be level. And they gave me a sledgehammer. I should drive it in the way they were driving it in. One would hit it after the other, would go in faster. But the sledgehammer was heavier than I. So I hit their hammer, and they hit my hammer. And this guy, this boss, with a board behind me, hitting me fast and hitting me in my back. And at that point, I remembered a friend of mine who came back from my camp, and he told me that's what they hit him, and and they sent him back sick. A week later, he died in the ghetto. A close friend of mine. And when he hit me again, I decided I got to do something because he's going to kill me. So I just dropped and started crying. I dropped when he hit me again, I just dropped and started crying. And he threw away that board and screams at me, "Get up!" And I'll never forget it as long as I live. In my mind, I said to myself, "I'll survive you so-and-so." And I wouldn't get up. And again, "Get up!" So he grabbed me and picked me up and put me down with another fellow with a 2-handled saw. and the carpenters, the German carpenters, had those stakes that were already driven in. They had them marked already where to cut them off. So I cut this thing off. The next day, when we got back to the camp, our camp director, the commandant, was a Polak. A felon, some kind of a felon. I don't know whether he was a killer or a thief or whatever. He had one of those green triangles which depicted him as a felon. He was our camp director, camp commandant. And I don't know where I got up the nerve, and I knocked on the door. He lived in a separate room, all by himself. We lived in barracks. The barracks were in the ground, just the roof was thickened out, and the roof was covered with grass anyway, so planes wouldn't see from up there that it's a camp. So I go into his barrack, and he's standing there, and I say to him, "You know, boss, that so-and-so almost killed me." And I tell him the story. He didn't say a word. I just kept on talking. And I say to him, "Look, tomorrow, if they'll call him for the group that goes to with him, his commander, they call it Commander Monkey, there'll somebody be missing in that group. You should know that's me."
Okay, we are on reel number 4 of Jack Wellner's interview. The date is November 9th, 1995. Anytime, Lori.
And I said to him, "And if in another commander there will be somebody, too many, you'll know that's me. Because I'm not going back to him. He almost killed me." And so it was. I went to the other commando, and my job was first unloading long pieces of iron. Here we call it rebar for construction. They were maybe 30 feet long. They were laying on flat beds, and we had to unload them, throw it down on the ground, and then later we had to carry them into a big shop. It was one big shop with a dirt floor. It was maybe 200 feet long, or more than that, and about 50 feet wide. And there were all kind of machinery on both sides. We had to carry those irons into that place where they were later worked on the machines. It was real hard work, because the thing was that iron was so long, so the first guy had to stand about 6-7 feet from one end, and I would go from the other end 6-7 feet, so the iron would hang down like this, and then when we started walking, that would, from walking, that would shake, so we would walk like this. We would walk like this all day long, taking it in there. And I saw that I wouldn't last too long doing that kind of work. So one day I got some courage, and as I walked in and dropped that iron near the machine, near that long table was next to the machine, there was a machine that might have been about 6 feet long and about 4 feet wide. And then there was on the end of the machine, on that 4 foot width, there was about a 2 foot space, and then there was a table, exactly the same height as the machine, a long table, maybe 20, 30 feet, and the same on the other side. And this German was operating that machine. He would put in that iron, and on one end and would press a handle. He marked it first where he wanted to bend it, press handle, and that machine would bend. So he had 3 helpers, those 3 Lithuanian Jews, because I said they took the best jobs. When they came in first, they took the best jobs, like machines or kitchen. They took the best jobs. And we had to do the ones who came with that 150 from Lodge, we had to do all kind of worse jobs. So he had two helpers on this side who pulled in the iron into the machine after he marked it. And then when he finished bending one end, this one guy from the other side, there was one guy on the other side, he would help the other guy pull that whole thing back so he could bend the other end of that 30-foot long iron. So I got some courage and I go over to this, after I dropped that iron, and I go over to the German and I say to him, "Boss, I see you need another helper." I say, "I worked on machinery and I know I can help you." And he looks at me and sort of smiles, sort of like a little grin, and he says, shuts off the machine, the electricity. He says, "Wait here." And those Lithuanians, they weren't too happy, to see me, do that. But I didn't care. And he says, "Wait here." And I see me walks over down to a place. Not far there was this superintendent of this whole place, was walking out with a helmet and a white frock. And I see him talking, pointing towards me. And he comes back. He says, "Okay, you stay here." And from then on, I had it made in that camp. I can say that in that camp, I was like 1,000% better off than in the ghetto. Why? Because this German would bring me, this boss would bring me every day, he would bring me a few pieces of bread. He belonged to an organization that was like construction. He had construction battalions. People who couldn't go, for some reason, couldn't go on the front to be soldiers. They were working behind the front. And they were mostly older people. And the barracks in the morning when they were eating breakfast, most of them didn't have any teeth. They would cut off the rind of the bread and leave it on the table. So you would gather it together and would bring me. I'll never forget the first time when he says to me, "Jacob, I brought you something." So the other guy says, "Boss, it's for all of us." Yeah? So, "Oh, no, for all of us, everybody will have just a little piece. Just for one person, it'll be okay." So they hated my guts later on because he took a shine to me. He would bring me, every day he would bring me a newspaper from the day before, the German, from the Nazi party, which was called the Völkische Beobachter. He would bring me the newspaper, and I would give it to the capo in the camp, who was also Lithuanian. But
Please explain who the capo is.
A capo was, they designated a guy that he'll be our boss. They would beat us, the capos, the Jews. They would beat us, do whatever they want. They were the bosses. So I gave this newspaper to a capo. So first of all, he wouldn't beat me anymore. And then he told the guy in the kitchen to give me an extra soup. So I had an extra soup. And so this way I was better off than in the ghetto. So so at that time, I was working with those machinery. One time, the camp, as I said, Dachau Dachau, the city Dachau, is about maybe 10 miles from Munich, Germany. And our camp was away around Dachau. And one day, I remember one day, Sunday evening, we saw the sky lit up red where Dachau, where Munich was. So we knew that the Americans were bombing Dachau. Or this were the British, I think, they bombed at night. The Americans were bombing it during the day. So the next morning, that was a Sunday, the bombing. We had every other Sunday off. We worked 13 days, and 14 days we didn't work. The next morning, after that bombing, I come to work, and this German, the boss, isn't there. He went home to Munich, and he didn't come back on Monday morning. So we standing there, the 4 helpers, we standing. At one point, about maybe half an hour later, after we were standing there doing nothing. the big boss, the one with the helmet, the superintendent, comes over and straight to me. I don't know why he came to me. He must have seen me because when my boss wasn't at the machine, I went over and tried the handle, see how it turns back and forth. I'm mechanically inclined. I wanted to know how it works. He comes over straight to me. He says, "Do you know how to work this machine?" I say, "Yeah." So he says to me, points on they had blueprints there. He points to me, "Make me one of those irons." So they brought in a piece of iron, and I bent it out, marked it with chalk, and bent it out. He looks at me, says, "Another one, about 3 or 4 irons to make." So he says, "Okay," and gives me a list, make so many of these, so many of these. So here now I'm boss, they are my helpers. About noon, that first day, about noon, I'm standing there, and I see all of a sudden, when I was looking down at the machine, I saw some people come closer, you know, my eye periphery. I saw up to about halfway, I saw some people with white frocks came over. I pretended I didn't see them. And after I had finished bending it, I said to the guy, take it away. So one of the Germans says, "Halt." They take it. They, you know, after it was bent, they could stand it up because so they can measure. They measured high. Measure. One looks at the other guy, you know, weitermachen, you know, continue. And so I became the boss. A few days later, the boss came back. What happened is he was in a bombing, and he had some kind of poisoning, like phosphorus poisoning, whatever. They were dropping down incendiary bombs, and he got some kind of a poisoning. I don't know what exactly. Can't recall now. So he finally came back. But believe it or not, 2 weeks later, I see a big truck came in, and they unloaded a machine, exactly the same machine, brand new machine, and they put me in charge. They gave me 4 helpers, and they put me in charge. And that was already like February of 1945. And then all of a sudden, and as I said, you know, as long as I was there, I was okay, because the German helped me, and I had that extra soup. And then all of a sudden, I got to say one thing, that when we came, the lice, you know, the dirt, the lice were eating us alive. When we came home from work, came to the barracks, we had to get our clothes off, you know, before we went to sleep, and kill as many lice as we could. Because we were all, our bodies were skin and bone, and all scratched to blood, you know, all bloody, because. And at that time, an epidemic of typhus broke out. And we couldn't go to work. I was cut off from this German. They quarantined our camp. When they brought some food for us, they would leave it about 50 or 100 yards away from the camp. The Germans who brought it, they would go away, and then they sent us some of our guys to go and bring it in. And then they locked the camp again because this typhus fever broke out. And they took a special room there for those typhus. At that time, and at the same time, they sent in, right after the typhus broke out, they sent in what they call an Entlausung, a delousing thing. What they did is we had to get undressed, naked, run. It was snow on the ground. It was like February about. Run to that Entlausing place. They had showers, cold water, not hot water. And there they had some powder like DDT or whatever it was. We had to powder ourselves, you know, every place. And the barracks, what they did, they had told the guys, you know, what to do. They sealed them and put some special gas in there to kill the lice or whatever. And at that time, I guess, when I was running naked through the snow, I must have called a cold because I got a high fever. And they thought that I have the typhus too. So they put me in the room together with those typhus people. At that time, I didn't realize what it meant, typhus. I didn't. So there were double bunks. They put me on the bunk, on the upper bunk, and on this side, maybe 20 inches apart, there was another bunk. There was a young kid from Lodge, and then up there was this, his name, a Lithuanian Jew who was every barrack had a head of the camp. He was the head of our camp. He must have been in his 40s at the time. His name was Fisher. He had already the typhus. So in the middle of the night, I wake up. There was one little light hanging there burning. I wake up and I take a look. This Mr. Fisher is sitting there and shaking like and talking, sitting like and talking. So he says to me, he says, yeah, in his Lithuanian Yiddish talking, 3 kilo fat they took away from me. I didn't realize that he's delirious. So I say to him, Mr. Fisher, who took it away from you? So he looks at me and says, are you normal? If I knew who took it away from me, I would go and take it back. So I saw right away that, Then he starts screaming, saying like this, my wooden klumpes, we didn't have any shoes. We got those wooden cloths, with the Dutch people wear. That's what he says. Oh, my klumpes, they call it the klumpes, they took away. So I didn't say anything, and then all of a sudden he starts screaming, calling a name. I'll never forget it, Sima, must have been his wife, and starts screaming, Sima, that it went into you, Sima. And there was another one, delirious, screaming, stop already you with that Sima, all night long, Sima, Sima. I'm telling you, it was hell. It was hell. In the morning, the doctor came in. It was a Jewish doctor, Lithuanian. There were 2 doctors, Lithuanian doctors, Jews, of course. He came in and comes over to me to find, because when typhus had spots, red spots, he starts looking for spots. He didn't see any spots. So luckily, he took me back out of there and took me into that main hospital. It was one room where the double bunks were lined up against the wall all the way around. And in the middle, there was like a stove. And on the stove there we had standing a pot. There was some like that what they call the German substitution coffee, like burned wheat or whatever that crap was. And so we drank of this. In the morning, I got up, I went down there, and next to my bunk there was a guy, also from Lodge, a friend of mine. I asked him, what's the matter with you? He says, Jacob, I don't know, but I have a high fever. But the doctors don't think it's typhus because I don't have any spots. So the next morning, I get up, and I go down, but I was also on top of the bunk, and I go down, take a cup, and pour me some coffee, that warm coffee, whatever that was. And he says to me, this friend says to me, Jacob, give me a cup too, and I give it to him. When I standing down there and drinking the coffee, the doctor comes in. He was a short guy, and I remember he had a limp. Don't remember his name. And he takes a stool, little stool, he had a stool, to examine the patients on the top bunk. He gets up on that stool, and as he is about to examine this guy, and this guy pushes him down, the doctor falls off. He says to him, get out, you Lithuanian, something, a name, called him. What's the matter in this place? Poison thermometers you have here? I felt right away, when you put the thermometer under my arm, I felt like a little prick, and I felt it go all the way to my heart. And to me, he says to me, and you, my best friend, give me poisoned coffee, and he throws that cup towards me, throws it down. Right away, they had to call a couple of guys, a little stronger guys, to hold him. He became, really belligerent, and belligerent. Started screaming, so they held him down, and they took him, and the doctor saw right away he had already those spots, and they took him right away into the other room there. He didn't survive. He died a couple of days later. maybe a handful of guys survived from those people who had the typhus. And we already couldn't go back to work already. And in April, I don't remember. I think we did go back to work in April. In the beginning of April, we went back to work. And I remember this German said to me, says, Jakob, I told him, you know, he was a real human being, what we would call a mensch. Because when I came to this camp, at the end of the ghetto, I got an ulcer. At the end of the ghetto, from eating all that stuff, you know, whatever. And I had pains just unbelievable. I would stand literally on my head, such pains. But I felt when I lie down on my back for about 15, 20 minutes, it would pass. At one point, when I was standing there as a helper, he saw me. I started, when I was getting the pains, I started to perspire. So he asked me, Jakob, was ist los? What happened? So I told him. So I said, well, what can you do about it? I told him, if I lie down for about 50 minutes. So he let me lie down behind him. There was a board, because the whole dirt floor, he was working on a machinery with electricity, so he had a big platform, a wooden platform he was standing on. So I would lie behind a machine, flat, and he would cover for me. So I would tell him, his last name was Stefan. I said, Mr. Stefan, I'll never forget you. After the war, so when the war comes to the end, you'll go home and you know, to your family, you know. So we still worked at that place, and it was, you know, it was okay until we went this camp until the 24th of April, 1945. And that day, they took us all, and they took us into the main camp of Dachau, the concentration camp. And in the camp, I saw a whole line of people laying out there.
How did you go from one camp to the other?
They took us by truck. They took us by truck to Dachau. And there were a whole bunch of people laying there, dead people. And I didn't know that they were dead. When there was a slang word when somebody was almost ready to die, they used to call him, he's a Muslim. A Muslim, that was a nickname. A Muslim, a Musulman, you know, in Yiddish. Those dead people, you know, that they died from hunger. But I was only in Dachau one day. The next day, on the 25th of April, they took us out, thousands of people, on a death march. And on that death march, I remember when we were walking out of Dachau, there was a siding, a railroad siding. I saw there were boxcars full of people in there. They were alive, because later, after liberation, when the Americans liberated Dachau, all those people were dead. So they took us on that death march, and we marched from April 25th till the 1st of May. The 1st of May, we stopped near the mountains in a little woods. There were smaller woods. It was snowing at that time, and they told us to stop there. When we stopped, we would lie down and fall to the ground, and right away we would fall asleep. The snow was snowing, and we heard, you know, when we fall asleep, we heard there was a highway. We heard the traffic, you know, tremendous.
Is that the first time that you had stopped on that march? Or
No, we stopped periodically. We stopped when they were on that march. For instance, sometime there were some bastards, Germans, at the end. We were pushing wagons with, supposedly, I don't know what it was, whatever there was in the wagons were pushing. They had some food for us too, like a piece of bread they would give us. But whenever there was a good German, because there were bastards, those SS that were leading us, when somebody fell, they would just, go over and shoot him to make sure he's dead. But whenever we saw a German, didn't shoot. When somebody dropped, they let him. So some people would pretend that they can't anymore, and they would drop too. And then later, when we walk further down, we were out of sight, they would go to the German farmers for some bread. But the Germans, they had some kind of also like what they call a Selbstschutz, self-defense force, and they would take all of those who dropped there, they would take them and bring them back to the transport. So we would walk, and periodically, like, we had the Russians, also Russian prisoners with us too. As a matter of fact, if I remember correctly, there were some German communists were in our transport. We would stop, like, for instance, we would march during the night, and during the day they were afraid for the airplanes to see. So we would be hiding out in the woods, and we would try to sleep, whether it was raining or something. For instance, I took along a blanket from the camp, but during the night I woke up and no blanket. Somebody stole it, some of the Russians or whoever, So we worked until May the 1st. We worked there, and in the morning when we woke up about 6 o'clock in the morning of the 2nd of May. Out of all the Germans, there were maybe hundreds of Germans watching us. There were only a few left. So they took us to this small town called Waalkirchen, if I remember correctly. Waalkirchen, a little place, a little village. And they put us into barns. And I didn't care at that time, where I just dug myself into the hay, the fresh hay. And about noon, somebody tapped me on the head. The Americans are here. I spoke some English because, as I told you, I had the papers to go to America. I started learning some English before the war. So they would ask, "Oh, you speak English?" I said, "No, I speak a little." "No, you speak very well." I was the only one. So the Americans came in on jeeps. They started throwing cans of food to us. I caught a can of butter. So I and another guy, we went to a bakery there. There was a line of Germans standing in front of the bakery. We just went in there without standing. The Germans are very, very, orderly. They wouldn't try to go before somebody else. They stood in line. We went in there. We got a fresh bread. And luckily, I didn't eat too much of it. I opened up the can and ate a little piece. But I got sick afterwards anyway, and they took me to a hospital. Not far from there was a hospital called Bad Tölz, a place called Bad Tölz, a beautiful place near the Tyrol Mountains. I don't know whether the Tyrol or the Alps, I don't remember my geography in that area. I'm not too sure whether these were the Alps, but near the mountains there was this beautiful town called Bad Tölz, and there was this hospital. There used to be, they told me later, there was an SS hospital. And they sort of nursed me back to my health there, because I know a lot of people died right after that from overeating. Our stomachs were shrunk, and they couldn't digest all that food. They died. A lot of people died after the liberation from overeating. So I was in that hospital maybe a week or so. I don't remember exactly when. And then I think another guy and we walked. I don't remember how I got to Munich. We got to Munich somehow. I can't recall now how we got to Munich. So in Munich we got into what they call first to a DP camp. It used to be army barracks. They called it the Flak-Kaserne. It used to be a army barracks. I was in that camp, and I was still a little bit under the weather when I got there. I didn't go. I was in bed, I think, that time, when two of the guys or three of the guys came running to me. Says, "Jacob, we saw your boss, Mr. Stefan," and he gave them the address. He wanted to know how I was, where I was. Believe it or not, I went to an American kitchen. I always used to go, guys who would come to me because I spoke English, so they gave me food, this extra food like fruit, oranges and apples, stuff that I didn't have all these years.